I was still holding my champagne glass when my husband's ex-wife crossed the reception hall toward me, smiling the way people smile right before they say something they've been rehearsing for weeks. The band was between songs. My father-in-law's laugh cut off mid-sentence somewhere behind me, and Renata stopped close enough that I could smell her perfume over the gardenias in my own bouquet. She glanced at the kids' table, then back at me, and I remember thinking, whatever she says next, she wants an audience for it. I didn't know yet that this moment was the smallest version of what she actually believed about me. Dale and I met 3 years before that wedding at a school fundraiser I'd volunteered to run because I liked the woman who chaired it and had no idea her son's baseball coach would end up asking me to dinner. I didn't walk into Wyatt and Josie's lives trying to be their mother, and nobody handed me a title for what I was becoming. I walked into 2 years of parent-teacher conferences at a plastic table built for 8-year-olds, sitting across from teachers who eventually just started addressing half their comments to me by default. I walked into a broken arm in an ER waiting room at 2 in the morning, where I was the one who signed the consent forms because Dale's hands wouldn't stop shaking, and a nurse asked if I was Mom, and I said yes before I'd thought about it, and nobody in that room questioned it. And every school project that needed a last-minute poster board run at 9 p.m. on a Sunday, usually while Dale was working a closing shift and had no idea it was even due. Renata came to exactly one of those conferences in 3 years. She sent a text instead for the others, usually something like, "Can't make it, tell me how it goes." I always told her. I typed out full paragraphs some nights, making sure she didn't miss anything real about her own kids, because it never once occurred to me that keeping her informed was optional. Wyatt asked me once, quietly, not long before Dale proposed, whether I was going to stayed, which was his 9-year-old way of asking whether this was permanent. I told him yes, in a way that made him nod like he'd been waiting a long time for someone to say it plainly. That's the version of our family I carried into the wedding, the version I actually believed in, the one where showing up for 3 straight years meant something real, whether or not there was a legal word for what I was to them yet. The wedding itself was small, 60 people at an inn on the lake the kids already loved, the same lake where the duplex sat, though none of us thought about that connection at the time. Renata came because Dale invited her, because he believed, and I believed too, that the kids deserved to see their parents being civil in the same room. I didn't think civil would last past the champagne toast. She'd been drinking a little, not enough to blame it on later, just enough to feel bold. She waited until there was a small crowd near the cake table, people who'd remember exactly how she said it, and she timed it for right after the toasts, when everyone was already looking our way, when there was nowhere for either of us to step out of the moment gracefully. "You've done such a great job," Renata said, loud enough for the table to hear, resting her hand on my arm like we were old friends. "Really, the kids adore you. You're basically the world's best nanny." A few people laughed, the uncomfortable kind. Dale's mother went very still, her fork frozen halfway to her plate. I smiled, because I didn't know what else my face was supposed to do in front of 60 people and a wedding photographer who kept shooting anyway. I'd spent 3 years doing everything a mother does for those kids, and in one sentence, she'd made sure the room understood I was hired help, who happened to get a ring out of it. Not someone with a say. Not someone who counted in decisions that actually mattered to this family. Dale apologized for her later that night, in the hallway outside the reception. "That was completely out of line," he said. I told him it was fine. It wasn't, but I didn't want it to define our wedding day, so I let it go, and we went back inside and finished the night like a couple with nothing hanging over it. I didn't know yet how literally she meant it, or that doesn't count indecisions wasn't just a feeling she'd have about me at a party. It was about to become an actual position, argued in writing over something worth $340,000. The second thing happened 8 months into the marriage. Dale came home holding an envelope from his lawyer, and his face had the particular stillness he gets when he's trying to stay calm for the kids' sake before he lets himself react. His grandmother had left the Cedar Lake duplex to Wyatt and Josie years earlier, held in a trust until Wyatt turned 18, managed by a family attorney named Raymond Aldana, so neither parent could touch the principal for themselves. The one flexibility built into it was ordinary and reasonable, the kind of clause most of these arrangements have. If a child had a genuine need the parents couldn't otherwise cover, the trustee could authorize a limited disbursement, but only as a last resort, after whatever the parents had already agreed to between themselves had actually been tried first. It existed to protect the property, not to lock it away from a real emergency. Renata was petitioning to use exactly that provision. Wyatt had been diagnosed with dyslexia, and the specialized reading program he needed ran $28,000 a year. Real money neither household could easily absorb on top of everything else. She wasn't asking to sell the duplex. She was asking Raymond to redirect its rental income, about $1,800 a month, toward Wyatt's tuition, arguing it was sitting there generating money nobody was using for the one thing it should obviously be used for, and that waiting years for a technicality to unlock wasn't fair to a 9-year-old who needed help reading now. Dale's attorney couldn't tell us how it would go. Neither could Raymond. It genuinely depended on how the trustee weighed last resort against a documented, real diagnosis and an argument that, on its face, wasn't unreasonable. That night, Dale and I sat at the kitchen table with the petition between us, the same table where the kids did their homework every night, and he kept coming back to the same line, the part where Renata wrote that the property was generating income no one was using for these children. "She's not wrong about that part," he said, and I could hear how much it cost him to say it out loud. I didn't have a counter-argument. I just had a feeling, the same one I'd had at the reception, that something about how she was framing this didn't line up with something else, and I couldn't yet say what. For the first time since any of this started, I understood this wasn't a fight we were guaranteed to win, and neither of us slept much that week. The petition named Wyatt's needs on every page. It never once named me. Every email went to Dale. Every call came to Dale. When I asked if I should reach out to Renata directly, just to understand what she actually wanted, Dale said she'd told him this wasn't really a stepmother conversation. I thought about the nanny comment more in that week than I had in the 8 months since she'd said it, because I finally understood what it actually meant. It was never really about a joke at a wedding. It was about her deciding, quietly and consistently, that I had no real stake in decisions concerning these kids, or anything meant for their future, including $340,000 sitting 40 minutes from our house. I also remembered, uncomfortably, that Renata had mentioned Wyatt struggling more than usual with reading, almost a year before any of this started, at a pickup line conversation I hadn't thought twice about since. If that was true, the diagnosis wasn't quite as sudden as her petition made it sound, and Wyatt's actual need, the real one, had apparently been sitting unaddressed for a lot longer than anyone in that filing admitted. I didn't know yet if that mattered, or if I was just looking for something to hold on to. I wrote the date down anyway, on the same legal pad where I'd started keeping a running list of anything that felt slightly off, next to a coffee ring I never bothered wiping up. What actually mattered, I found by accident, not by looking for it. I was the one who kept our household paperwork organized, mostly because Dale is disorganized in exactly the ways I'm not. And one night, digging through an old filing box for Wyatt's immunization records for his new pediatrician, I found the original custody agreement from Dale and Renata's divorce, 9 years old, still in its original envelope. Tucked into the back of it was an addendum I'd never seen before. Any extra costs for the kids, tutoring, medical, specialized schooling, anything outside normal expenses, got split 60-40 between Dale and Renata, straight from their own incomes, no court involvement required, no trustee, no waiting. It was dated. It was signed. By both of them. I asked Dale if Renata had ever actually sent him a request under that agreement for Wyatt's reading program. He said he honestly hadn't thought about the addendum in years, and wasn't sure it was even still in effect. Neither, it turned out, had his attorney, who'd gone straight to the trust language the moment the petition arrived, and never pulled the original custody file at all. I called Dale's attorney myself the next morning, before I second-guessed it, and read him the exact wording over the phone, while he went quiet on the other end. The kind of quiet that meant he was rereading his own copy of the trust language at the same time. "If that addendum's never been formally invoked," he said finally, "that might actually matter more than anything in her filing." He asked me to send him a scanned copy that afternoon, and to see if I could find anything showing whether Wyatt's reading struggles went back further than the diagnosis date in Renata's petition. It took me 2 evenings of scrolling through old email threads with Wyatt's 3rd-grade teacher to find it. A message from over a year earlier, before any formal diagnosis, where the teacher had flagged reading concerns and recommended an evaluation. Renata was copied on that email. She'd never replied to it. If the trust could only be touched as a genuine last resort, and there was a whole existing, simpler channel sitting untouched in a filing box, and the sudden, urgent need in her petition had actually been sitting unaddressed for over a year, that seemed like something worth putting in front of someone before mediation, not after. I wasn't sure it would be enough to change anything. I just knew nobody had looked at it yet, and that I was the only one in the house who'd have found it. The mediation happened on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that smelled faintly like the coffee cart in the hallway. Nothing like the wedding reception 8 months earlier, except for one thing. Someone had left a vase of gardenias on the side table, and the smell hit me the second I walked in. Renata sat across from us with her attorney, composed, laying out the same case from the filing. A documented diagnosis, a real cost, income sitting unused while her son fell further behind. It was a good argument, delivered calmly, and for a while, listening to her make it without a hint of defensiveness, I genuinely didn't know which way the room was leaning. Raymond asked careful, neutral questions about the diagnosis timeline, the program's accreditation, whether other funding had been explored. Renata answered all of it smoothly, like she'd expected every question. Then Raymond asked one more. "Had a request for Wyatt's tutoring costs ever been submitted under the existing 60-40 custody addendum before coming to the trust at all?" Renata's attorney glanced at her. She said she wasn't aware that agreement was still active, that it had been years, that she'd assumed the trust was simply the right mechanism for something this specific. Her attorney pushed back, arguing that even if the addendum technically existed, nothing in the trust language required exhausting every possible informal arrangement before petitioning, and that last resort was a matter of interpretation, not a checklist. For a minute, it actually sounded like it might hold. Dale's attorney slid a copy across the table, the addendum I'd found, still signed by both of them 9 years earlier. Never voided, never expired. Along with the email thread showing Wyatt's reading concerns had been flagged, and Renata copied on it, more than a year before the recent diagnosis her petition described. "This isn't a new circumstance," Dale's attorney said. "It's an old one that was never brought to either of the people already obligated to help with it." "The trust language is explicit that this is a last resort," Raymond said evenly, setting both documents side by side. "I can't authorize a disbursement when an existing, uninvoked channel could reasonably cover the same need, and when the record shows that need existed well before this petition says it did. That's not a judgment on the diagnosis. It's just the order the document requires, and the timeline the record actually shows." Renata's face didn't crumble. It just went carefully blank, the look of someone recalculating in real time, realizing the argument she'd built so carefully had a door behind it nobody had told her about, and a date on it she hadn't accounted for. Her attorney asked for a recess. When they came back, Renata agreed to withdraw the trust petition and instead formally request her 40% share of Wyatt's tuition from Dale directly. Exactly the mechanism that had been sitting in a drawer the entire time, available to her the whole way through. It wasn't a defeat with a headline. It was the argument simply running out of road, because the necessary first step had never been taken. The whole dispute ended up costing close to $3,000 in attorney time on both sides, money that could have gone straight toward the tutoring everyone agreed Wyatt actually needed. Dale and I spent that August doing something almost embarrassingly ordinary. We drove out to the duplex with the kids and repainted the porch, because Wyatt said the color had gotten sad, and Josie wanted to help pick the new one, and she picked a yellow that didn't match anything, a shade closer to a school bus than anything meant for a porch, and I let her have it anyway. Nobody mentioned the mediation. Nobody needed to. Wyatt started his reading program that fall, paid for the ordinary way, by 2 parents splitting a bill, the way it probably should have happened from the start. And his teacher emailed in October just to say he'd read out loud in class for the first time all year. 3 sentences about a dog, nothing dramatic, exactly the kind of small thing that used to make him go quiet in the car. I forwarded it to Dale without a single comment, because some things don't need one. I stood on that porch at the end of the day with paint on my hands and gardenias, actual ones, growing wild along the fence line the grandmother had planted years before any of this started. And I breathed it in the same way I had at the reception, except this time, it didn't feel like proof of anything. It just felt like mine. The paperwork protects that property. It was never what made me their family. That was 3 years of Sunday poster boards and 1 signature in an ER waiting room nobody questioned, long before any trustee ever knew my name. If you've ever been the one who showed up quietly while someone else decided out loud whether you counted, I hope this story felt like it was for you. Subscribe if it did. We post new stories every week. Was there ever a moment someone tried to shrink your role in a family that was already yours? Tell me in the comments.